Hi, my name's Father Jonathan Duncan.
And I'm Mr. Gabe Lewis. Mr. Gabe Lewis?
I don't know. Do you have another description?
Gabriel Lewis.
Okay, that seems good.
Okay.
Gabe Lewis?
I'm Gabe Lewis.
Are we recording now?
Yeah. We should leave it though. That's a good intro.
We should leave this. No, we'll take it out in editing. I'm the chaplain at St. Joseph's Catholic School.
And I'm the campus minister at St. Joseph's Catholic School, and also freshman theology teacher.
We thought we would come together with it being Holy Week and all, and talk a little bit about life right now.
Because a lot's going on.
Yeah,
in a way.
A little unusual.
Yeah, a lot is also not going on.
Yeah.
Let's just dive right into it.
All right, let's get to it.
We're going to start with a question for the Padre.
Okay.
So this came up in my freshman religion class right before we went into virtual mode. A student said, "Mr. Lewis, is it true that maybe this is coming as like the plagues came for the Egyptians as a punishment for us?" And then it's funny. Not just the student said it, but I was browsing through the Facebook and came across someone who I follow very closely, Terry Jean Bolia. Do you know Terry Jean Bolia, Father?
I can't say that I do, but
you might know him.
He or she sound like someone that I would maybe want to associate with.
Okay. Maybe if I say his stage name, you'll recognize recognize the person. Hulk Hogan.
Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, Hulk Hogan.
For those of you who don't know, first of all, Google Hulk Hogan. Had an amazing movie career, including but not limited to Suburban Commando, like circa 1991, and also Mr. Nanny. Mr. Nanny. You've never seen any of his movies? But more importantly, he was a professional wrestler. I saw him wrestle once in Memphis, and I believe he was wrestling Jerry the King Lawler. You get that for free.
That's cool. I saw John Paul II several times.
It's not a contest.
Okay. I think I won.
But
So anyways, Hulk Hogan, though, on Instagram, perhaps all of you who follow Hulk Hogan on Instagram know about this. He also claimed and encouraged his many followers to look at this as a punishment from God.
So here's what Hulk.
Oh, you found it already.
I did, thanks to the internet. In 3 short months, just like he did with the plagues of Egypt, this is Hulk Hogan, God has taken away everything we worship. God said, you want to worship athletes? I'll shut down the stadiums. You want to worship musicians? I'll shut down civic centers. You want to worship actors? I will shut down theaters. This is a tough question because I guess we need to start with not why is God punishing us or is this God's punishment, but the question being, should we even try to interpret events like this? Like obviously right now we're in the midst of this pandemic, and should we be trying as Christians to even interpret these events? Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Well, I guess when I think about my own life and something that happens outside of my control, because obviously one of the first things that this situation shows to us is I'm not in control of this.
Yeah.
And no one is in control of this, right? Reality is outside of our control. So when that happens in my personal life, I know that, let's say, something unwanted happens. I have a bad interaction with someone, or I fail at something, or something happens to someone I love. I still have to face that reality in my personal life. I have to see what does this mean for me? So I think on a personal level, I interpret,
So would you say that those things are sent to you by God?
In hindsight, usually I discover something unexpected that was really good for me. So it's really hard to say that at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's one of those difficult things because, the first time someone says, this is God, and we hear this a lot in like a really superficial level of people saying like, this is God's punishment on us And I think saying that in a really like superficial, naive way is not helpful. But I don't want to be in a position where I'm saying life is just outside of God's control.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it just happens to us, and He's up there, and He wishes He could do something. You know, but He's up there, and we're down here, and I don't know that that's I don't know that that's a Christian or frankly a very hopeful place to be in. So
let me ask, Father, you who know, you're on a first name basis with the church fathers and the people who have gone before us in faith. And the Pope recently said we should tap into these people. We should look back at those who came before us. What did, say Saint Augustine say about something like this?
Just pulling this out
of nowhere.
Not having prepared at all. I'm just imagining what would Augustine have said. Augustine might have said, or in fact did say word for word, God is so good that He would permit no evil unless He were powerful enough to draw some good out of any evil. I think that's where we have to be. That God's let this happen, and if you can't say that God has let this happen, then what you end up with is a vision of God who's either impotent or indifferent, and neither of those is frankly a God I want to worship or pray to, or it's not a very hopeful vision. You know, there's that line from Psalm 119. I know, O Lord, that your judgments are righteous, and that in faithfulness you've afflicted me. So as hard as it is, and I think it's easier when you bring it down to the individual level, and I look at my own life and my own experience and say, I know that my experiences of suffering, of rejection, of pain have not been outside of God's control, and that there is some good that He's working in the midst of those. And if I can say that about my own, then that means there must be truth to it on a meta level, on a bigger level.
You know, I am conversing with students often and looking at our lives together often, right? We're often looking at our reality and trying to see what's here. And something that came up actually just recently in a conversation in campus ministry was that a lot of times it does feel like reality is against us, and it's hard sometimes to see that behind reality is a face of a Father who loves you, and that reality actually is a tender friend, because reality can be, a friend too can be difficult at times, can challenge you. A good friend challenges you.
I think Lewis has something to this point. Shocking. He had to show up. It was only
this wasn't prepped.
This was not prepped. We did not prep on this. He does talk about how, if we assume and expect that life is given to us just to make us happy, we're going to be crushed. We're going to be disappointed because it doesn't. A lot of the times it simply doesn't. But he also says, but if we see life as something that's meant to be, I think the language he uses is like formative or educative or corrective even, then all of a sudden, okay, some of this makes sense. So if you see life as a grandfather, somebody who's just supposed to like give you nice things and praise you and tell you how awesome you are, and then you're going to be upset. You're going to be confused.
Right. If you see, when I see life that way.
Right? If I see life on the other hand as a father, someone who ultimately won't abandon me, but at the same time has moments of real correction, of real education, and that's going to be painful. It's been painful for me.
Right.
Then I think that gives you a slightly different lens.
Right. So let me switch gears for a second here. So still on this question of, is this sent by God? Is this a punishment by God? Or, people of faith all over are interpreting this differently. And you'd think that Pope Francis would immediately say, absolutely not, there's no way. But I want to read what Pope Francis said the other day in St. Peter's. Because he does kind of take a surprising position here. So
Pope Francis? That's almost hard to believe, Gabe.
Okay, I mean surprising even for those who can't be surprised by him anymore. I don't know. Here we go.
Sure.
Greedy for profit, we let ourselves get caught up in things and lured away by haste. We did not stop at your reproach to us. We were not shaken awake by wars or injustice across the world, nor did we listen to the cry of the poor or of our ailing planet. We carried on regardless, thinking we would stay healthy in a world that was sick. Now that we are in a stormy sea, we implore you, wake up, Lord. So he doesn't quite say that it's a punishment, but he does say that, like, this is being given to us to teach us something that we're missing. We were on the wrong track.
Yeah, we're certainly not being spared this.
Right.
Like that's a reality. However you want to interpret the events, economic, health-wise, like we're not being spared this.
Right. So, if good is coming from this, well, let's start with the question. What good has come from this for you, Father?
So I think for me, for my family, it's meant a lot of the stuff we do as a family has been stripped away. A lot of the busyness has been stripped away. I think that for me, that's like the big thing that this has done is like it has stripped away a lot of the extra kind of ephemeral, like it's been stripped away. It's not, you can't do it. A lot of the busyness of life has been, now that doesn't mean, when you have 4 kids, there's always busyness, but a lot of the extra I feel like it's just been kind of stripped away. At least for me, I don't know, what has it been like in the Lewis house?
Well, 3 kids under 5 years old means it's not boring. I haven't experienced what some of you who have teenagers are experiencing, where you're dealing with boredom. We're dealing with just constant activity, but I'm home now with my wife. Definite appreciation for the work of stay-at-home moms and dads. Definitely growing in appreciation there. I personally actually have felt this as a call to listen more. That's been really coming to me these last few days, especially. And as someone who does a lot of talking as a teacher and as a leader of different things, I see Jesus telling me to listen. And then on the family level, one neat thing has happened is that our daughter, Claire, because she sees my wife and I praying, we do some of the prayers with the St. Joe's community, the Angelus midday, and other prayers throughout the day. She sees that together. She sees some of your faces on the computer. So now she's actually asked me, like, Daddy, are we going to pray the Angelus? Now, granted, she can't make it through more than a few seconds of the Angelus, but she actually asked that question. And I've seen that more, not because I've told her, hey, you need to pray more, Claire. Come on, it's time to pray. But she's actually grown her own curiosity for what this prayer thing is that y'all are doing. So that's a good thing.
That's great. I mean, I think one thing that's coming out of it is, and this is a difficult thing for a lot of people, and I don't want to take it lightly at all, but we're getting a bigger sense of our own lack of control. We're being reminded how little control we have over our own life, over our future. And, I think for most of us, at least for me, a lot of the times that's no bad thing, being reminded of that. It's a corrective. I think it's an education to constantly be told, you don't know when this is going to end. I can't determine when we'll have public masses again, when my kids will be back in school, when we'll be able to go to a restaurant again, when we'll be able to, be out in large groups again. I have no idea. So I think that loss of control, even though it's not really a loss of control, it's more of a like being reawakened to the fact that you didn't have it to begin with, or it was an illusion to begin with.
How much we depend on so many others for so much of our life, for all of our life. It's we depend on others, and our dependence on God is the undergirding of that dependence. It's shown, our dependence on God is shown by how much we depend just on our neighbors, on right now our healthcare workers, and I don't know. I've had the sense that I don't even realize how much I've taken for granted up until this moment. The other lesson from this time is that we have to choose what really matters, what's essential right now. So we're not in control, like you said, and we don't have access to so many things that we might have thought were essential. And so we're forced to look and say, what really matters? What do I most need for my life?
Yeah, I feel like our life, and maybe even most especially we're feeling it as Catholics, like our spiritual life it's being stripped bare. And I think it's strange. It's almost like, there have been moments in the church's life where the church has been in the catacombs, where it's been, very simple. And there's a sense in which, like, that's sort of how we're living now. I mean, obviously it's a little bit different for my family, because like on Sunday we celebrated Mass at home. But I know, for
totally not fair. But
exactly, I know it's just, you do you, as they say. But I think, for now most Catholics, they're praying. They're removed from the sacraments. They're frankly experiencing what a lot of our brothers and sisters in parts of Asia and Africa, where maybe they don't have a priest, or maybe they're under intense religious persecution, and they're having to pass on the faith through prayer and devotion in the home, instruction in the home. So there is something like we're being, it's stripping away all that's not essential, and getting us down to something, especially as we draw closer to Good Friday. I think it's interesting that we're coming upon a celebration of the Lord's Passover and death, which is going to be so stripped bare. I mean, it's going to be the faithful and the crucified Lord in a really simple, not cluttered way. And
before we leave tonight, we'll say a few things about how we can live these next 3 days of the Sacred Triduum during this time. Wondering, is this a moment, Father, for a quick, ridiculous, hilarious kid story of quarantine?
Go.
Okay. I'd say mine is quite simple. Claire, it was probably 10 in the morning, and she kind of looks at me suddenly with this pensive face. She's sitting at the table, and then she just says, "Daddy, does the Easter Bunny have to stay home too?" And my first thought was, wait, why would the Easter Bunny?
Augustine did not address this.
No, I was left to my own resources to answer this theological question. And so, on the fly, all I could say was, Easter bunnies don't get the coronavirus. And she accepted that answer, so.
I don't know that scientifically that's...
Yeah, I know. I saw an article later that proved that wrong.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure bunnies can get it. All right. So, our first Mass as a family, this was Lent 5. We're there. It's at the offertory.
This is in your room in your house,
yeah,
behind this wall.
This is a couple of walls back where the piano is, little table, and we've got some incense going. We've got 2 candles. wasn't a bad deal. But so we got to the offertory, and we were going to sing, and we did sing the Hear Us Almighty Lord, known by some as the Attende Domine, or sometimes known as the Lenten prose. I think it's beautiful chant hymn. And I said, okay, guys, I'll do the verses, or I think Mom and I will do the verses, and you guys will just do the chorus. Do you know what a chorus is? So I turned to Alexander and I said, Xander, do you know what a chorus is? And Xander says, yeah, like in Bon Jovi, like It's My Life, or Living on a Prayer, where they sing the verses and then there's a thing you sing over and over again. To which I responded, that's awesome. Yes, you're right. Just like Bon Jovi.
So let's get on to another question here.
Okay.
So we've said, how should we interpret this time, and then what good is coming from it? Let's ask, how can we live during this time?
Okay.
And so earlier you had asked me kind of what I've been up to, what I've been reading, and I shared that I read a Joseph Conrad novel. So high school students who are listening to this, you are being made to read so many awesome books. But because you're being made to, you often don't realize how awesome they are, and all of us wish we could go back and read some of these things. And I found a tiny bit of free time in my life to read a book called Typhoon by Joseph Conrad, and I just happened to be reading it when this virus broke out, or at least when we realized how serious it was. And the story of Typhoon is about a man on a ship in the early 20th century in the South China Seas, and they're facing an unbelievable hurricane. The barometer drops, they start to realize something's coming, and this captain and his second mate, who have never seen stormy weather, are seeing a terrible hurricane. And as I'm reading this, I had in the back of my head the news that was coming out, and I was struck by how this paralleled what was going on. Dirty weather he had known, of course. He had been made wet, uncomfortable, tired in the usual way, felt at the time and presently forgotten. So that upon the whole he had been justified in reporting fine weather at home. But he had never been given a glimpse of immeasurable strength and of immoderate wrath, the wrath that passes exhausted but never appeased, the wrath and fury of the passionate sea. He knew it existed, as we know that crime and abominations exist. He had heard of it as a peaceable citizen in a town, hears of battles, famines, and floods, and yet knows nothing of what these things mean. Though indeed he may have been mixed up in a street row, have gone without his dinner once, or been soaked to the skin in a shower. Captain McWhirr had sailed over the surface of the oceans as some men go skimming over the years of existence to sink gently into a placid grave, ignorant of life to the last, without ever having been made to see all it may contain of perfidy, of violence, and of terror. There are on sea and land such men thus fortunate, or thus disdained by destiny or by the sea. So the idea that there's actually, it would be a form of disdaining to spare us from the
to
trials.
never encounter a storm like that.
Right. And that somehow how you are changed when you come out on the other side of that storm makes the storm worth it. And I know that's not a new idea, but in the end, when they're facing it, the captain gives this advice, which I want, help me break this down in terms of our life, but he says, don't be put out by anything. Keep her facing it. Keep the boat facing the waves. They may say what they like, but the heaviest seas run with the wind. Facing it, always facing it. That's the way to get through. You're a young sailor. Face it. That's enough for any man. Keep a cool head. So, why should we and how can we face this reality, these circumstances that we're being put through?
I think we have to start by acknowledging that this is not life as usual, not trying to make it life as usual. I think we have to accept that for these next few weeks, maybe months, who knows, our life is being radically altered by something outside of our control. And acknowledging that in the way we go about our daily life, being willing to adjust, being willing to take this time as a gift. I mean, it's given to us. That's the definition of a gift, right? It might be what Lewis and others have called a severe mercy, but it's been given. And taking it as it is, and not just lamenting. I know, I don't know about you, but like I can find myself getting into the interacting with people and just sort of going through the lament of like, oh God, when's this going to be over?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so done with this. And what does that help?
Right.
Like it's somewhat cathartic, but not really. Whereas facing it and just acknowledging this is what it is. How can I? What's there for me in this?
Right. At campus ministry, the question that we've been asking is, are you living this time as an anarchist? The anarchist always tries to shape things and put his own will onto things. Are you living this time as a gamer, just distracting yourself however you can from reality and from your circumstances?
It doesn't have to be just games.
No.
It could be,
Netflix. It could be, I don't know. It could be playing piano. It could be even something really beautiful if you're doing it so that you don't have to look at your reality.
Yeah.
And then the third position, so anarchist, gamer, or a religious position. And religious position doesn't first and foremost mean saying lots of prayers.
Locked in your room,
Doesn't
saying
mean
prayers.
But religious in the sense of being certain that all that is, my circumstances are the way God continuously reaches me. My circumstances, no matter how apparently trivial or even terrible they are, our circumstances are the way God calls us to himself.
This is harkening back to the first question, right? Should we interpret our life at all? And I think it sounds like what you're saying is the religious perspective says all of life is a gift, and so I have an obligation to interpret it. Whereas I know I've known religious people who would say, yes, I believe in God, but he's up there, and this is just life as it is, and gravity, and their diseases, and this is how the natural world works. Almost like a deistic view. God is ever here, and he sort of set things up, but he's kind of stepped back. We send some prayers to him now and again, but it's not really a religious worldview. Whereas I think a religious worldview, at least a historically Christian and Catholic one, Catholic and Protestant really, would say you can't cut God out of the equation. You can't put him, he's up on the second floor doing his thing, and he's kind of left us down here with gravity and natural selection and diseases, and this is just how life is.
Right. Yeah, it makes me think of how Pope Francis said, this time is going to put all of our preconceptions and our ideologies to the test, and we're going to see what really stands up, right? What really actually helps me to live, and what helps me conquer fear. And I'm thinking of my kids again here, that when they're scared, it doesn't really help if I tell them not to be afraid. What helps is when I take their hand or I pick them up. So what we need in times of fear and what we need in times of uncertainty like this is we need to be certain that we're not alone. That
Have you ever been worried about something and someone said, "Don't worry," and it actually helped?
Yeah.
No. We do that all the time, though. Don't worry about that.
Right.
Like, when does that help? When has it ever in the history of ever helped to just tell someone, "Don't worry"?
Yeah.
Being with someone,
right,
that reassures.
So, how can we be certain? How do we grow in the certainty that Jesus is with us in the boat right now? And let's just point out how crazy it is that, at least here in South Carolina, the order to stay at home, the firm order to stay at home, I mean, we've already been doing that, came in Holy Week.
Yeah. Wow. It's, I used the image before of being like this idea of life being stripped bare, down to the essentials. And, the Catechism talks about, there are really five general ways that we encounter the presence of Christ, right? So it talks about the Word, the Scriptures. It talks about the faithful, the gathering of the faithful, prayers of the faithful. It talks about the faces of the poor, the suffering, in the Eucharist, in the sacraments, and then in the priest himself. And what's interesting to me is we are now in a time where all the various ways we have of encountering the presence of Christ are kind of being like stripped down to the essential, right? So we can't really gather with large gatherings of the faithful. So we've got Zoom now. Like this is the new,
right.
And it's been stripped down to like, how much do you want to gather with other believers? Because you're going to have to deal with, Zoom bombs and like technological errors and just kind of awkwardness.
Yeah.
The Eucharist, right? This is like the sort of preeminent way for Catholics to encounter Christ, and it's now been stripped down to acts of spiritual communion.
While watching a YouTube
While
Mass,
watching a
Facebook
YouTube
Live.
or Facebook Live Mass, and it's been stripped down to a longing of the heart to commune with Christ and a trusting that even though you can't be present in the Mass, Christ is going to come and make himself present. We can't be, so Christ is present through his priesthood. We can't generally interact with priests now. So it's like it's been stripped away. I do think it's interesting that our encounter with the poor and the Scriptures, like those are places.
Right.
Now, of course, our experience of the poor has been limited too because of all this.
Well, yeah, but I want to say something to that what's left are those who are in need around us, even if it's just our immediate family or our grandparents who we can call, our neighbors who are older who we can check in on, like the poor, those in need from us who we can help, and that presence of Christ is still here.
And of course the Scriptures. This is a time for Catholics to rediscover, there's a sense in which our experience of Christ in the Eucharist is being stripped down to the essential, to this longing for spiritual communion. But the presence of the Scriptures it's still with us. We'll give you some resources at the end to engage a little bit more with Christ in the Scriptures. But I think that's an interesting gift that we're being given during Holy Week. And I just think it's fascinating. I was taken aback by that image of the Holy Father praying by himself in an empty St. Peter's Square. And just the image of the church itself, in a sense, being stripped down to one man, the fisherman, praying before Christ crucified. And this idea that the church is being kind of, stripped bare. And the reason I use that is if church life were going on as normal, and it were just businesses that were being closed and other shops and restaurants and things like that, if we had all those other things, but we were still having public worship, there would still be a great degree of busyness, right? Like I'd have responsibilities, I'd have altar server rehearsals, I'd have schedules, I'd have all of these things. And it's interesting that because of this, and because of the fact that we don't have public worship, it's meant that even for priests, to a great degree, the busyness of the Triduum, of Holy Week, has been stripped away for us. Now we're doing the whole YouTube thing and Facebook Live stuff, but a lot of the busyness is being stripped away so that we're approaching the Lord's Passover and death in a really bare bones, us and Christ crucified, in a way that if we had the full liturgies as we normally would, you wouldn't experience that, I think, in the same way.
Yeah. Well, that brings us into kind of the conclusion here of our little Porch-Cast. Today, as you're viewing this video, it's Holy Thursday, Maundy Thursday. Tomorrow's Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and then Easter Sunday. And none of y'all can go to the beach. None of you can go to the mountains or the lake. Like Father, like myself, we are going to be in our homes. So I guess it's a chance for all of us to pay attention to what's happening these days. So we just wanted to give you more than like a bunch of events or links. We want to tell you just sort
No,
of...
we are going to give you some links. I just want to make it very clear. You're getting
The
links.
show notes will have some links in it. We can't not have links.
Yeah,
But
there'll be
we
links.
think it's more important that we have a few words in mind for each of these days that we're about to live, so that as we do the laundry, as we mow the lawn, as we change diapers, or as we cook meals, whatever it is we're doing during these days, we can have in the back of our mind what's happening in the life of Christ, our friend. Christ, the face behind all of these circumstances of our life, the friend who's a tender friend who cares for us and wills our good and wants us to be happy. So, Father, how about you give some of the words and I'll just say, so Holy Thursday, what can we have in mind Holy Thursday?
I think when I think about Holy Thursday, the big words are God gave. I mean, just considering, the gift of the Eucharist, that Christ willed to make his presence known to the church preeminently through, not through just knowledge, but through the gift of himself through a sacrament. So God gave.
Mm-hmm.
I think also as we look at following the supper, his time in Gethsemane, the idea that God wept, that God was lonely in that moment of agony. I think that's powerful. I think reflecting on that.
I think often on Holy Thursday of the image of Christ with this small band of people who realized who he was and realized that they couldn't live without him, and that life only made sense when they're at his side, and this intimate time. So it's a time also of Christ's friendship and how like moving his friendship is. Okay, so then Good Friday.
This is a God who has wounds. We worship a God that bled, that experienced the kind of rejection and the kind of suffering that we've come to know in this life, and the fact that God's Son thought that was not beyond him to experience that. What, to me at least, it does not give comfort in the midst of uncertainty and suffering, and to think that God is far off and remote, but to know that God, the God who spoke the universe into being, that God made himself present, and that the Son of God bled. I think that's moving, and I think keeping that in front of us on Good Friday is essential. That's the essential point.
Right.
Christ crucified. That's what Paul says. Like this is the core.
Yeah, and it is a day to be sorrowful. It's a day to know also the price of our sin and the price of all the hurt that we've caused, and yet he took that. So it's a day also to contemplate his face with gratitude and sorrow.
That's like the idea that the sins that sometimes we gloss over, like, oh, I'm not that bad, or oh, like, it wasn't that bad what I said, it wasn't that bad how I gossiped. Good Friday again strips all that bare and says, no, this is how ugly it looks.
Right,
this is how ugly gossip looks.
Right.
This is how ugly jealousy looks.
Which moves us to why we need Holy Saturday. The day of, I think of Holy Saturday and as a day of waiting. This is the day when the church, the disciples who had fled kind of come to their senses a little bit, and they make their way slowly back to Mary, and to John and to Peter and to the others that begin to gather, and they wait. It's a day of waiting. And maybe in that moment they couldn't see Christ, he was gone, but they could see his mother, who was the most certain of him.
I think the idea of Holy Saturday as this day of waiting, it just once more gives us the truth that the redemption that we long for, both in our daily life and of course at the end, is not something we can create. Like, all we can do is wait for it, is receive it.
Right.
And the disciples, like, the resurrection was the ultimate gift in the same way. It's why, like, the virgin birth is so essential, right? Because Christ had to come not as some product of human labor and effort, but as a total gift. And the resurrection is the very same. All they could do was wait. They couldn't hasten it. They couldn't, they couldn't speed up it. They had to wait.
And then Sunday this year, a day of celebration. What words would you put with Easter Sunday?
God, what word? There's so many. Love one, what words? He's risen. He's alive.
Right. Joy and hope, and yet this year it's not going to be. I mean, we're still going to do Easter baskets at our house. Thankfully,
I think it's supposed to rain.
It's supposed to rain.
It's supposed to rain and sort of be
again,
cold.
everything being stripped.
Everything's been stripped away.
Right. So the Easter Bunny may or may not have COVID.
Easter Bunny's not here. You're probably going to be inside, hunting eggs inside a house with your family.
So
stripped away.
Our joy too. It'll make us think, what is true joy, and what does the resurrection mean? What does it mean that the ultimate enemy is gone, has been conquered by our friend, by our God?
I mean, in a very real way, once the fear of death is gone, like, what else do you have to fear? What else can anything or anyone do to you once the fear that's behind every fear is gone? We have nothing to fear.
But we know we know the words aren't enough, right?
Yeah.
That's why the church gives us this time, so that we can experience the presence of a friend and of a father, just like children who need that to conquer their fear. So I think that pretty much wraps us up for this moment. So. We'll have some links that will be included in the notes here, and in the we'll have them linked on our St. Joe's website. And we're so grateful just to be a part of this community that God's given us, and that as a teacher, I'm amazed by your children, or you, if you're one of my students who's watching this.
Take this opportunity. I know for some of you parents, you may feel like, what am I supposed to do?
Yes.
All of a sudden, I'm the pastor, the minister, the priest in the house. All of a sudden we can't.
Not literally like he is. Like,
like some of you.
Those of us who are not priests and pastors.
Yeah, priest.
We now have to lead the family church.
And
so
So we're going to give you a few resources to kind of help you do that. But at the end of the day, hold before your family what's essential. Be willing to strip away what's not, and hold before them your own love for the Word made flesh. And that's what's going to be beautiful to them.
You show them your need for Christ, and they will be okay acknowledging their need for Christ and to begin to look for him as you look for him. May God bless you all and have a happy